grab names first.
Hi, I'm Rihanna Tooley.
I'm David Ingalls.
Right, I'm Laura Rodger.
And I'm Netty Gerard from Liberate.
Okay, so the question that I'm going to ask is, you've got a minute to answer this once I've asked it, okay? As you know, the legislation's been agreed to be written and it's now being written. What we'd like to know is, how are you going to support that when you get voted in the time? How are you going to support that through the States so that we get the legislation at the end of it?
Do you want me to go first?
You've got a minute.
Ladies first.
I prepared and seconded the amendment that brought forward the legislation into 2 phases, and hopefully we'll see it move faster. How am I going to do it? I am going to hold feet to the fire of absolutely everybody who's involved with policy making and the writing, and I will continue to shout and lobby and make speeches that everybody I possibly can until we get it through.
Thank you. David.
As we know, it's incomplete, and there's a lot of work to get it through the law officers. But there's one area that I personally was disappointed with, and that's age discrimination. And it is a major issue for anyone who goes over 50. In reality, but generally it starts when people hit 60, 65, and there's a huge untapped wealth there of knowledge, of experience, of keenness to actually carry on working, and especially as the States, and I was one of those people that voted to raise the pension age to 70. So, you know, the reality is, if we don't and not enforce, but if we don't involve people at an older age, understand that they could contribute to the economy.
Yeah, we could have to go into the next question. As we know, trans is a characteristic as well, like age is not in there at the moment. It's likely to come back in regards to the trans segment, and one of the biggest challenges and one of the most challenging questions is always, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single sex spaces like toilets and changing rooms, and what's your view on that?
I think there's a great deal of fear that causes people to speak in ways which are damaging and hurtful to our population, and not just to the people who are directly affected. For me, I don't want anyone who is there with an intent to hurt or harm in a space where there are vulnerable people. I don't care whether that person is male or female, whether that person at birth was identified as male or female, or what that person is wearing. If that person is there to harm, then they shouldn't be there. If that person is not there to harm, then there's no reason why they can't be there. And I don't believe there's any reason whatsoever to suppose that trans people are any more likely to be out to harm than anybody else. For me, a safe space is one that we have made sure is safe because of the way we as a community behave and treat other people. For me, trans people are what they say they are, and they should be allowed into the spaces that have what they identify as written on the door.
It's very difficult to add to that, and it makes a lot of sense. I think I hate to keep saying it, but I come from an older generation that doesn't understand some of the complexities of the different types of genders we have now. So it's a learning curve. It takes time and understanding, and it won't be done overnight. We clearly need to ensure that education works in the right way to make people aware that there are different people who need caring stroke understanding as to why we should act in a more responsible way.
Thank you. Public questions.
Would you support legislation to ensure that non-binary people are able to be legally recognised as being non-binary?
Makes no odds to me. I mean, genuinely, it's as simple as that. Why does it matter, really? Why do you need to know?
cultural change will take a while for people to understand, and exactly what you said, why does it matter? There's 2 generations there that don't understand fully what education is.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Darren.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Burford.
Rosie Anderson. Just Rosie does.
Right, my name's Ren Bock and I'm here representing the States of Guernsey. I want to ask our question. When I ask a question, about that minute to answer, it's a really short time. So as you know, the legislation now for equality, for anti-discrimination has been agreed to be written and it's away being drafted. What we'd like to know is how are you going to support and ensure that the legislation goes through and is enacted in the next states?
Okay, well I think it's really good that what they did in the last states was to bring phase 3 into phase 2, because I was very concerned when I saw that it was going to run into what would essentially be the next state's term afterwards, because it's up to about 2027. So it's all been brought forward into this term, so there's no excuse now not to get it all through and get it all done. And I think that's absolutely vital. So, the committee, whoever goes, I'm not particularly, if I get elected, looking to go on that committee, but for the people who go on employment and social security, they need to ensure that the legislation is one of the priorities and that it's brought back to the states as soon as possible.
Thank you, Dan.
I agree with Yvonne. In many ways, it is the prioritisation that is given to legislation that probably is out of the hands of people that are, maybe are on other committees. We can lobby for that, but that obviously is something that needs to happen and needs to be will. I think in addition to legislation, I think the other thing that works in tandem, and I did have a very interesting conversation on the telephone with a voter about this, is almost the piece of it is almost the mindset of the implementation of the legislation, in terms of almost the acceptance is the wrong word, but almost the will of the public to and business to sign up to it. And I think in many ways this is where younger people, I'm using my daughters as an example, for them things that were maybe unusual in previous generations, for them are just now absolutely matter of fact.
Rosie?
I have difficulty with equality. Difficulty with equality legislation. It should be matter of course. I mean, you go in, you're equal, blah blah. You legislate, I think it puts barriers.
There's 2 or 3. I mean, one is that nobody's getting paid from their land. It says
I don't know where to go from there. I lived in America for quite some time, and at the time I went there, if you were black and female, you were in, but you were only in for 3 months, because that allowed the companies to fill their quota for that year. So they hire, fire. And that does terrible damage to the person that's fired.
And my question is sort of the elephant in the room, this question. It's likely that trans is going to come back into the legislation. It's not actually in there as a characteristic at the moment. And one of the big things that always comes up is, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenges in the writing of legislation of trans people in single-sex spaces, i.e. toilets, changing rooms, or other areas?
You go first.
You can go first.
I think in many ways it's sometimes some practical solutions. I mean, my daughter was at Beaucamp School and they had unisex toilets. So in many ways, and they were single cubicles. So in many ways that obviously was, you can almost say future-proofing the situation, because everybody had their privacy and nobody was was singled out as doing anything wrong or right or anything. It was just a problem. So in many ways, I think there are practical ways that, as you say, those single-sex scenarios will be managed. It's interesting, even I'm getting involved with some volunteering for some sport at the moment, and obviously the issue is quite a challenge for sport.
Well, is it possible to get short answers from
Yeah, no, absolutely. We must have the characteristic in there. We've also got to have sex and all the other characteristics, and it's really important that everyone is respected and everyone's rights are seen to be accounted to without any rights clashing. And I think we've got to come to an accommodation that achieves that. We absolutely have to.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can't see difficulty. As somebody said, cubicles, you shut the cubicle door. What does it matter what sex you are?
Thank you.
Martin Roussel.
I'm Aidan Matthews.
Lester, I'm the little guy in the little chair.
Oh,
Do you want a proper chair?
No,
We've got a proper chair here. Look,
No, I'm fine.
we've got.
okay, we really into bad times, so apologies, but my name's Laura Rodger and I'm representing the States of Guernsey.
And I am Netty, and I represent Liberate.
And my question is, as you will be aware, the legislation has been agreed to be written and it's gone through to be done. And what we are wanting to know from you is, how are you going to support for that legislation to be enacted when it comes back to the States in the new States? Lester?
Well, for 8.5 years, I hope my record proves that I've always supported and always driven and always spoken in favour of and always voted in favour of anything to do with equality. I've always championed and supported the underdog and the underprivileged. I'll continue to do that, whatever it takes.
We've only got 45 seconds each. So.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited to see that we've got some equality legislation going forward. Previously was a branch secretary for a trade union, and that was one of the things that we saw was that the lack of equality legislation really kind of tied your hands, and some of the things that might be possible in the UK just didn't exist in Guernsey. And I'm disappointed that not all of the characteristics there. We've got age discrimination in, which is definitely an issue in Guernsey, and will become more of an issue as we've got an ageing population. But yeah, we'll fully support the new legislation coming forward.
Yes, I was looking at it today actually, and I support in principle. I will sound a note of caution though, and I think the disability legislation was stalled because it didn't take business with it, and I think there was a lot of compromise at a late stage. I've looked through this, and I think you'll get the same sort of problems with this, quite frankly. So, what can I do to help? Let's preempt that. Let's get the dialogue going early. Let's not let it go that far and then have pushback. So, a lot more correspondence with that sector to get them on board. You've got to take them with you.
Okay, so my question, and we know that it's likely that trans is going to come back as a characteristic. It's not in there at the moment, and it's inevitable this question's going to come up, and it's the elephant in the room in regards to, in the legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people and single-sex spaces when that's debated? How do you feel about it?
Each one start.
This
Okay, thank you. As I understand it, in the legislation, it's talking about gender reassignment surgery and complete transformation rather than self-identification. Is that correct?
Sorry, we're talking about basically trans people using the toilet that they identify with and how you feel about it, basically.
But is it self-identification, or is it somebody who's already demonstrated that they're transitioning?
You can answer for both.
Okay, I think you'll have a problem if you try to take away women's, as they say, women's spaces.
I don't think that. I mean, I think you can design facilities in such a way so that people still have privacy, right? I mean, in some way, I know in my office we've got gender neutral toilets just because it makes it easier. So I'm sure it's possible to kind of work around those issues.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. What really concerns me about all of this is that everyone's getting hung up with putting people in pigeonholes, filing people away into certain categories. Most people are pretty responsible, so surely we can, like Aidan says, work together and the states can come up with some kind of something that everyone's comfortable with and is acceptable. I'm sure we could, but I don't see why we couldn't do it.
I think it's probably reasonable to say that, you know, perhaps that sort of thing could incorporate some element to say, well, you know, ensure that there is privacy for, you know, for those people that want it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does any other sort of, you know, policy legislation tackle those sorts in that detail kind of? If that's a concern that we want.
Yeah, well, there's issues with obviously America, the Work bill.
Yeah.
So it's whether that comes up and how it's going to be debated pretty much. So we will sort of, I can't go into too much depth, and I also can't really give an opinion as such at this stage. But yeah, I just want to ask a question.
I think businesses sort of, you know, feel that they want to incorporate.
I've been contacted by a lot of women that are extremely concerned at what they see the invasion of their safe place.
There's also,
so
of course,
we need to respect that.
There's trans guys as well.
Indeed,
so you could
indeed,
also
same argument. Yeah.
have the risk of forcing them into the women's toilets, basically.
Yeah.
Legislation.
It's going to be a very interesting debate.
But it's all about respecting each other's space, surely. Surely it's all about education rather than legislation.
And also we get on with it now.
Yeah.
So, and this is another thing that's going on. We are getting on with this now, so it's almost a non-issue, but it's going to become an issue when it comes to legislation.
I think you're right though, education is the answer, workplace training. I've taken the training that you've offered, so hopefully you've made a little more aware of it. And it didn't seem that onerous, to be honest, in fairness.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Could we just ask you to speak out who you are for the camera?
Simon Delamere.
And Sarah Breton.
Okay, my name is Laura Rodger, representing Equality Guernsey, and this is
Lexi representing Liberate.
And my question is, as you're aware, the legislation has been agreed to be written, and it's away being written at the moment. And by the time we have a new States, we're hoping that quite quickly it will come to the States for the first enactment. So what I'd like to know is, how are you going to support the legislation to get it through the States?
By literally constantly checking up on it, because there are so many legislations outstanding at the moment, and mainly to do with social equality and health. Having been on the DUZANE, I have actually monthly seen what legislations are coming through for enactment, and it was always finance and business related, and the young ones just got booted to the side because they were prioritised as being more important, which I wholeheartedly disagree with, because the balance is so out of kilter now in Guernsey, and things need to be put back on track.
Okay, Sam.
Yes, well, I totally agree. The anti-discrimination legislation is one of my main priorities if successful. So yes, just the constant checking, and obviously also when it does come back for approval, trying to make sure that there aren't too many amendments or people just sticking their fingers in, trying to get this little detail or that detail, and just slowing down the whole process.
And also watering it down.
Well, yes.
When you've got a strong legislation and then it starts getting picked apart, before you know it, you've got a use question.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Yes, later in.
So basically, trans has been fall out. It's going to come back again, as we know. And when it does, one of the most difficult questions that always comes up for some people, at least, in regards to the discrimination legislation, is responding to, or how will you respond to, the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces and the discussion that comes around toilets every time and changing rooms from there.
Well, personally, I think Guernsey needs to start taking on a European look at everything, because France, way back, quite a few years when I got married, well, there was a toilet. Didn't matter what sex, gender you were, child, adult. That's where you went. I grew up in Germany. Things are already a lot more liberal there. I was in the hotel industry, so to me, it's all the same, and that's the mindset we need to get. In the schools, we need to do a lot less of separating out. You fit into that category. You fit into that category. It's wrong. I'm also for wear your own clothes. Teach them from young. It doesn't matter what you're wearing. You shouldn't all be looking like these little minions, all lined up, all identical. That's not what we are. We're individuals. We're all different.
Thank you. Simon, from that.
Well, yes, I imagine the simplest answer is just unisex. Just everybody can use any facility. So yeah, I'm in full agreement.
Public, actually. Should we go for any public questions?
Well, without the introduction of unisex toilets, would you support trans people using the toilets that they identify with the existing facilities? So trans women using women's toilets, trans men using men's toilets, without the introduction of the additional.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Merritt.
My name is Ross Brown.
I'm Lexi from Liberate.
And I'm Laura from Okay. And my question really is about, the legislation now. It's been approved to go forward and it's been written, and it will come back to the States once you're elected into the States next time. And what we're interested in is two things really. How are you going to support that going through the next term? And the question that
do you want to do your question first?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Lexi, I did that wrong. I haven't been doing it. So really, how are you going to support it through the States, and how are we going to ensure that people are supported to understand and get education around it?
Okay. Well, I think the problem's been when they did the presentation of it at Beausejour, there wasn't that many other businesses there. I went there because I wanted to, it was going to affect my business, so I wanted to find out, but there was probably about 20 to 30 people there. I was expecting there to be maybe 100, but then there was a 3 month, or around 3 months consultation period where I'd asked to go on any working groups there was, so I did get put on a working group, and I found out that we're not going to be expected to employ people that aren't capable of the job, and I think that was a lot of businesses' main concern. I already knew that probably wasn't going to be the case because I'm signed up to the Disability Charter with Guernsey Employment Trust, and I have been since the beginning of 2018. I'm the only business in construction that's actually signed up to it. But there is a lot of fear, and it doesn't help that people who haven't even tried going and getting educated on it are sort of spreading it a little bit. But a bit more consultation, like you mentioned before, courses on it that people can just jump on basically.
So you're a supporter of the education side of it?
Yeah, definitely.
Hello, yes, sorry. The two questions, how to support progress. I think it's really good if candidates can get an understanding of where we are now and how we got there, and what the barriers were and how they've been removed, or indeed even if they have been removed. That's all available, it's all public information. How can you support the progress? Members, if elected, I think you said when elected, it's very positive of you, but if, I think that's probably a better word to use at this juncture. If elected, there's lots of parliamentary mechanisms members can use. So written questions, oral questions, demanding updates, asking what the barriers are, and also working in committee. It's really important that we get the right people elected onto employment, social security, that are driven, that are focused, and that are willing and able to get through those barriers and deliver this in a timely manner. And the other question was, I've got my glasses on because my eyesight's failing, how ensure understanding? Okay, good question. Part of it is culture. Part of it is understanding the culture we're in, addressing, having the conversations, being open, being transparent. If there's barriers, if there's concerns or fears, we address them, we speak about them. We don't just say it behind closed doors, we're open, transparent about it. And it's very much, I much prefer education to legislation. Education should be front and forward, and legislation as and when and if needed. It is needed. I'm not for one moment saying it's not needed. But we have to understand and educate our community to ensure they understand not only the reasons why, but the reasons how. And I think that's really important.
So you'll support education for the community?
Yes, so when it came through to the States, I did try to do an amendment to actually get an equal rights organisation or a version of that. It's all very well saying we didn't have an equal rights organisation, but that wasn't actually proposed to the States. So as I was assistant deputy at the time, I did support an amendment to try to finance it, because ultimately government has to put the money where their mouth is, and that is where we have failed to deliver on education so far. Sorry, I'm a little bit passionate.
Okay.
Passionate, but let's just turn on. Sorry, I jumped in.
So mine is trans as a protected characteristic is going to come up again, as we know, and one of the biggest and most contentious points on this, and this leads into my question, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenges of trans people in single-sex spaces, i.e. toilets, changing rooms, and there's going to be some stir up there, and how will we respond to that and get that into the legislation?
Myself, I don't know how to answer that. It's not an issue that I've had to deal with personally. It's not even an issue that I've been that educated on, to be honest. I do know there is some fear in the community on it, because I've had it personally mentioned to me that self-identifying is an issue for people that are in feminist groups. But I don't know. It's hard to not offend people when you're trying to answer a question that you don't know, you've got no experience in the issue.
I'm sorry, Jennifer.
We're going to have to move you on, I'm afraid.
I just must be the answer to all last night. I solved the world then.
You could
That's
have.